So, last week we looked at how have we got here as a culture. And tonight I want to think about how we as Christians should or could or can engage with that culture around us. And I guess we'll be thinking of friends and family, colleagues that we might engage with, but also thinking more broadly of how we look at culture as Christians. Give you two extremes. Some Christians might say, look, Christ is opposed to culture and therefore Christians need to fight against culture. That's an extreme. I can't think of any actual Christian that would say that explicitly, but they might think it or kind of imply it by the way that they interact with culture. So they might say, look, the world is irredeemably fallen and we must separate ourselves from it to avoid pollution and temptation. And of course there's some biblical warrant for that view. Jesus' brother James in his letter says religion that God our Father considers good is what he says, to help the widow and the orphan and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So there is something in that keeping oneself from being polluted, but that's maybe one extreme. On the other hand, we might have the view that actually Jesus is for culture. And so, the Spirit is at work in culture. And we must join in where Jesus is already at work by his Spirit. And again, there is good biblical warrant for that. God is the God of the universe. He's not just the God of this little church community here. The Spirit blows where the Spirit will blow. He is not limited to working within the church and sometimes our kind of quite narrow vision. And even in the Bible, God often uses non-Christians or pagan rulers and people to achieve his purposes, and he can do the same today. So there's warrant for both those extremes, and it won't surprise you to suggest I'm going to kind of maybe say there's somewhere in the middle that might be the best way, or at least a good way. So with those two extremes in mind, Christ against culture, Christ for culture, maybe a more balanced understanding might be something along these lines, and that is the gospel, the message of Jesus, which we believe as Christians, and underpins our worldview, the way we look at the world, both confronts and completes culture. Right? So there's a bit of truth in both those things. So when we encounter views or cultural moments or movements, we'll invariably see ways in which the message of the Bible confronts elements of it and says, no, that's wrong, and calls it out. And also kind of completes it, it fulfills it in a more positive way. So to take a very recent example, a fairly recent example, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but you can tell me afterwards. The Me Too movement, a couple of years ago. Do you remember that whole Me Too thing that happened? Sexual harassment against women, sparked by those allegations and then convictions against Harvey Weinstein, spread across all sorts of sectors, women sharing stories of sexual harassment with the slogan Me Too. What is a Christian view of this? How should we engage with that kind of movement in culture? Well, first of all, I would say that the gospel both confronts and completes it. It completes it by saying, yes, there is a reason that all women should be able to relate to men free from fear of sexual abuse, and that is that they are of infinite worth as creatures made by God in his image. So we, particularly as Christians, have a reason to value all women, right? To shout from the rooftops that they are not objects for men's sexual desires and fantasies, that they are fearfully and wonderfully made and deserve to be treated with respect and have autonomy over their bodies. And yet there's perhaps an element of confrontation as well from a Christian point of view. Jesus was very clear in his teaching on sex and marriage. He was endorsing the Old Testament scriptures which place sex within the context of marriage. And in that sense, you could argue from a Christian point of view that Me Too doesn't go far enough. For sexual violence to end, we need a much better vision for sex and what it is and its place. The view of sex as merely kind of for pleasure between two consenting adults, which is what our society would say, has maybe, in some ways at least, provided the conditions for the strong to abuse the weak. And I mean that very literally in that instance. So that's a very brief thing, and there's lots more to say about Me Too, but it's just an example to say the gospel both confronts and completes. Some have called that something called subversive fulfillment. So it kind of fulfills, but in a subversive way, what culture often is pushing towards. The gospel fulfills our cultural drives whilst at the same time showing where it's gone awry. To help us think further about this idea, I'm going to whiz through this. But this book I recommend to you. We read it very recently. It's by a guy called Dan Strange, who used to teach at a theological college. He does something different now. And this is called Making Faith Magnetic. And he is drawing in this work on the work of a missiologist called J.H. Bavinck. If I've got any Reformed theologians in the house, I didn't think I'd ever use that sentence, and I haven't ever before. You may have heard, if you're into Reformed theology, of a guy called Herman Bavinck. J.H. Bavinck is his nephew, if you're interested. Anyway, this chap, Bavinck, early 20th century, he's a missiologist, means he's studying mission, and he's looking at how Christians interact with other world religions, right? And he points, and he notices, really, when he's studying these other world religions and our interactions with them, that all human beings, regardless of their religion, seem to kind of have 5 magnetic points that seem irresistible to all human beings. Different cultures and religions answer those points in different ways, but they can't ignore them. There's a kind of pervasive, you could call it a religious consciousness, right? Charles Taylor, who we looked at last week, The Secular Age, he talks about secularism as being haunted by the kind of the enchanted worldview of religion, the idea of God, and all of those associated ideas. It's a wonderful phrase, secular society is haunted. Anyway, the reason for this haunting, or these 5 magnetic points, is seen in Romans chapter 1, verse 18. So Romans 1:18, Paul says that human beings have actually been given sufficient knowledge of God's existence that they can't deny it. But he says in Romans 1:18, they suppress that truth, consciously or subconsciously. We as human beings suppress the truth that we actually know and can see plainly in the world. And as humanity suppresses that truth, it then, hey presto, pops out in all sorts of unexpected ways, in these 5 magnetic points. And that is true whether you are a religious person, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Sikh, a Jew, a Christian, or in fact, a non-religious, avowedly atheist person in a secular society like many of our friends, colleagues, perhaps family. And those 5 points briefly are, you can see them on your notes if you've got them, totality, a way to connect, norm, a way to live, deliverance, a way out, destiny, a way we control, higher power, a way beyond. And so Dan Strange applies them to secular society. Really good book this, I recommend it. Let me just tell you very briefly how he I'll show you a little bit of example of each one, and because that will help us see why this might be helpful for us to try and begin to engage with secular culture. So first, totality, which is the human need to connect. In particular, to connect with something bigger than ourselves. Dan Strange gives various helpful examples. He notes a Facebook ad which was celebrating its 1 billionth user on Facebook, and it's got this long kind of list of ways that we connect as human beings, and then it concludes the advert saying the things that connect us, then it says, the universe. This is how it finishes. The universe, it is vast and dark, and it makes us wonder if we are alone. So maybe the reason we make all of these things is to remind us that we are not. And Facebook is the way that we are to connect, is the implication. Or we could think of the recent fad of discovering our family roots, you know. How many people watch Who Do You Think You Are? It's a very popular programme for some reason. And maybe it's because actually we want to feel that we are connected to something deeper than us, something that is more than just our immediate existence, right? We want to know who we are, where we've come from. We could think of the strange loss that we all felt during lockdowns, as we couldn't gather in big numbers, as we couldn't have huge sporting events or huge massive concerts with thousands of people there. Or we could think of the pull of conspiracy theories, which are strangely kind of attractive to us as human beings. Why? Well, maybe it's because we want to feel that we're connected to something that most people can't see, but there's this hidden matrix behind it all. And we know we're connected to it. The list could go on. You can think of all sorts of examples. Can you see? Even non-religious people have this itch for totality, connection to something bigger. Is there a way to connect? Can you begin to see how the gospel fulfills that? Massive. Okay, norm, a way to live. We as human beings instinctively know that there are norms to which we must conform. Now, religious people call these kind of moral norms, what God tells us to do, but non-religious people have these norms as well. There is an inescapable need for us as humans to have norms and to live by them. It's a lovely example that I heard on a podcast of this, which is goth culture. If you're not familiar with goth culture, goths are often teenagers or young people, they're not exclusively, who wear black clothing, maybe heavy eye makeup, and listen to kind of sad-sounding music and things, right? Maybe some of you have been goths. What I love about this is, like all subcultures, because subcultures are examples of kind of bigger cultures, right? In goth culture, if you are a kind of well-known, accepted part of gothland, if you like, you can wear bright pink and still be considered like a true goth. If, however, you're not accepted and you wear bright pink, well, you've broken all the rules. Isn't that interesting? So even within this kind of goth culture, there are these unspoken norms you have to conform to. I think that's really interesting. Okay. The concept of a norm, a standard, it's a perennial human truth. We hear it on radio phone-ins. How must we respond to racism in the police? That's an interesting word to use in a society which doesn't really believe in morals, it says. And yet there are norms that we all live to. You might go into a coffee shop and someone says, do you have plastic or paper straws here? And they say, we have paper straws. Okay, I can drink it. That's a norm in our society now. Do you see it? These kind of moral norms which we adopt. Okay, I wonder how the gospel fulfills that. Interesting. Deliverance, a way out. There is a sense that things are not as they should be in all human beings, and we yearn for somewhere over the rainbow which will all be better. There are questions around what we need to be delivered from, what this redeemed future state is, how we can affect that deliverance, but it is a deep human longing. How have we answered those questions? And we see it all over the place again. I could give lots of examples, but of course, all of those mini examples which we could think of are actually the kind of reflecting the fundamental need for deliverance that we all kind of know is there in the face of death. Right? So Dan Strange at the end of this chapter on this one says, he describes a fascinating group called the Order of the Good Death. Have you come across these people? These exist. There's a thing called the Order of the Good Death, a group of funeral industry professionals, academics and artists exploring ways to prepare a death-phobic culture for the inevitability of mortality. So our culture is death-phobic according to them, and they have a grave garment designer, a mushroom decomposer, a smell of death researcher, I kid you not, a morbid cake maker. These are all people on their staff. And Strange comments that though it might look like the Order of the Good Death are saying that we need to kind of embrace death rather than being delivered from it, it is still a deliverance. In their view, deliverance is found in accepting that death is natural, but that death anxiety of modern culture is not. Do you see? So there are all these kind of like ways that humans invent deliverance. There we go. Death is the final confirmation of our sneaking suspicion that all is not right with the world. And we all want deliverance. You know, you could think about our obsession with dystopian novels and film series like Twilight. Why do we like them? Because they take us out from another world. You know? Okay. Destiny. I'll do these more briefly. Relationship. Destiny is to do with this kind of complicated relationship that we, universally as human beings, have between our freedom and our responsibility. Between our kind of autonomy and the sense of, you know, there being a determination, something determining us, something else in control. So if you think about it, most people instinctively both think that we lead our lives, and that we kind of undergo our lives. And lots of people use that kind of language. You know, it's in my genes. Or this kind of, people speak of fate. They don't really know what they mean by it, but they kind of get that there's something that's outside of their control. Destiny. Are we active players in the world, or just under the thumb of some higher force? And if you don't believe me, talk to people about superstitions. People are weird about superstitions. And yet they say they don't believe in God, but they are really, really firm about what they will and won't do when it comes to kind of touch wood, or don't walk under that ladder. why is that? That's really interesting in a secular culture that doesn't believe in silly ideas like God. So, last one, higher power. And this, of course, is actually what lies behind all four of them, and kind of why they're all overlapping, really. It's interesting to note that in the recent census in 21, as well publicised, decline in traditional religion, Christianity in particular, doesn't always denote decline in religiosity. So, especially a belief in higher power. I think, I can't remember what the statistics are now off the top of my head, but a load of people still believe in some kind of higher power, even if they don't believe in the traditional idea of God as presented by Christianity. Marie Kondo, anyone kind of chucked all their stuff away recently under the influence of Marie Kondo? She apparently, when she goes to a new house, goes in, and doesn't matter who it is, goes in, she has a 2-minute ritual where she kneels down and greets the house. Because that's a traditional thing you do in a Shinto temple, apparently. And our secular God goes, yes, of course. That's right. You do that, Marie Kondo. Interesting. Rise of champing. Have you come across champing? This is camping in churches, which is really popular because people like waking up in a kind of a heavy place, a place of kind of where God has been. But they don't believe in God, they just like, it's belief in higher power. There we go. How does this all apply practically? Really, really briefly. I hope that's interesting, and I hope also that what you will do with that information as you process it is when you watch films, when you read books, when you watch TV series, when you chat to your friends and you hear their views and you practice listening, as we spoke about last week, you might begin to discern that although they don't share your religious convictions in terms of Christianity, they are, in a sense, no less religious than you. And it's quite a helpful ground to engage on with people. To turn it on their head. I'm not religious. Are you not? Okay. What do you mean when you say this? That's really interesting to me as a Christian, because that sounds to me like language of redemption, which I really do believe is real through Jesus. You can use these things as tools to just kind of diagnose your friends, not in a weird way, obviously. So 4 things we could do as a result of all this practically. I've written them down there. Entering. So step into the world and listen to the story. That's what I mean when you're reading books, when you're watching films, when you're talking to people. Listen carefully to what that culture, what that person is saying to you, and try to think critically about it. And see ways in which the gospel both confronts it and completes it, offers what it's really longing for. Explore, that's what that next one is. Search for elements of grace. Where is this sign of God's goodness? And also, what is confronting? Where are the idols here? Where is Jesus better than an idol this person is actually serving, whether they realise it or not? Do you see? That's exploring, and that's an exposing, showing up the idols of destructive flaws. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go into conversation with your family and say, I cast out the idol of such and such, or, this needs to be done carefully and sensitively. And then evangelizing, which is showing off the gospel of Jesus as subversive fulfillment. Let's just point people to Jesus and say, this is what you're really longing for, everybody. You're trying to find the answer here, but let me tell you about the answer here in Jesus, because that is so much better. And it's wonderful. So that's one little way that we could think of beginning to engage in culture around us. I hope that's helpful. If you've got questions about that, because I did kind of rush through, probably the best thing is to borrow my copy of this book, or you can chat to me afterwards and I'll try and explain it better.